So after 5 brutal seasons, The Boys has finally come to an end. And honestly, for a finale that had only around 1 hour of runtime, it tried to carry an insane amount of emotional weight, character closure, and thematic payoff all at once. Now, did it completely meet everyone's expectations? Probably not. But at the same time, it also didn't completely crash and burn the way many people feared it would. Instead, the finale landed somewhere in the middle. Messy in some places, surprisingly powerful in others, but overall trying to give the story a meaningful conclusion rather than just a giant spectacle. And beneath all the violence, chaos, and dark comedy, this finale was really about one thing: the collapse of generational trauma. Because from the very beginning, The Boys has always been a story about damaged people creating more damaged people. Soldier Boy passed his trauma onto Homelander. Homelander passed that same emotional poison onto Ryan. But Ryan became the first person in this cycle who actually chose a different path. And that's why the opening interaction between Ryan and Homelander was so important. Soldier Boy spent his entire life trying to earn approval from his father. Then Homelander spent his entire life trying to earn approval from Soldier Boy. But Ryan represents a completely different generation. A generation that refuses to blindly worship toxic authority figures. Instead of begging for validation, Ryan confronted his father directly. And when he mocked Homelander by basically telling him that becoming a god would never make him happy, that moment completely shattered Homelander emotionally. Because by this point in the story, Homelander had already been rejected by almost everyone who mattered to him. His lover, his followers, his father figure, his real father, even his own son. And once that happened, his narcissism evolved into pure paranoia. He stopped trusting everyone. He humiliated Deep, ignored advice from the people around him, abandoned allies. And during his public speeches, you could literally see him mentally falling apart in real time. Because Homelander had finally reached the point where there was no coming back anymore. The road ended there. Now, one thing the finale clearly tried to do was wrap up as many remaining character arcs as possible. Ashley, Deep, Stan Edgar, General V characters, all of them were addressed in some form. Some endings worked, others felt incredibly rushed. Ashley's ending honestly made sense. The show had been hinting for a long time that she could either fully become a monster, or finally redeem herself. And in the end, they chose redemption. But Deep's storyline, that was genuinely strange. The show spent multiple seasons dropping hints that maybe, just maybe, Deep could slowly become a better person. Yet by the end, he basically died with almost zero actual character growth. If someone watches Season 1 Deep and then compares him to Season 5 Deep, there's barely any difference at all. Then there's the General V setup, which honestly felt extremely awkward. When Annie tells Marie that the world still needs hope, and that someone new has to carry that torch forward, it was obvious the show was positioning Marie as the future face of heroism. Which matched the direction many fans predicted before the finale even aired. Meanwhile, Stan Edgar quietly returned to power exactly the way he always does. Calm, untouchable, always 10 steps ahead, and somehow, after all the chaos, he ends up back in control of Vought once again. But the weirdest part of the finale was definitely the handling of Soldier Boy and Kimiko's powers. Technically, the experiment shouldn't have worked. Even the show itself basically admits that. But Sage clearly understood something important about Soldier Boy's abilities. His nuclear explosion only activates when he reaches absolute emotional collapse, when his mind completely breaks under pressure. And Sage intentionally pushed Kimiko toward that exact emotional state. She manipulated her rage, her grief, and her trauma, hoping Kimiko would unlock that same dormant power. And somehow, it worked. But honestly, this is where the writing starts getting shaky. Because earlier seasons established that even missiles couldn't penetrate Soldier Boy's skin. The Russians spent decades experimenting on him before they finally created that radiation-based transformation. So the idea that Kimiko suddenly developed similar abilities after extremely limited exposure feels a little too convenient. And realistically, her body probably shouldn't have survived that level of energy at all. But obviously, the show prioritized dramatic payoff over strict logic. Now if there's one character who absolutely won the entire series, it's Sister Sage. Seriously, think about it. She entered the story alone. Manipulated everyone around her like chess pieces. Survived Homelander. Survived Vought. Survived multiple failed plans. Survived the apocalypse itself. And by the end, she loses her powers, escapes alive, and finally gets to live peacefully like a normal human being. No punishment, no tragedy, no consequences. She basically walked away with the perfect ending. But the emotional heart of the finale was obviously Homelander's downfall. Because once his powers were taken away, the illusion finally disappeared. For 5 seasons, Homelander presented himself as a god. But without his abilities, he instantly became what he truly always was underneath all the fear and intimidation. A terrified, emotionally broken man. And Anthony Starr absolutely carried those final scenes with his performance. You could literally watch Homelander move through every stage of emotional collapse. First denial, then bargaining, then desperation. He tried negotiating with Butcher. Tried promising favors. Tried pleading for survival. Tried convincing himself it wasn't real. Because for the first time in his life, raw power could no longer save him. And honestly, that was probably the most satisfying punishment the character could receive. Now one thing comic fans definitely noticed, was how many direct references this finale borrowed from the original comics. Especially the moment where Butcher kills Homelander while he's already broken and vulnerable. And even more importantly, Butcher finally reaching the conclusion that killing one monster changes nothing. Because eventually, another Homelander will always rise again. That ideological realization comes directly from the comics. And so does the final conflict between Huey and Butcher. Which leads into the most tragic parallel in the entire finale. Because when you really think about it, Homelander and Butcher were never that different from each other. Both were consumed by obsession. Both destroyed lives. Both pushed away the people who cared about them. But their endings reveal the key difference between them. Homelander died completely alone, rejected by everyone, consumed by paranoia, unable to trust anyone anymore. But Butcher, despite losing almost everything, still had Huey beside him in the end. And Huey remained the moral center of the story from beginning to finish. He never fully lost his humanity. Never completely surrendered to hatred. Which is why Butcher's death feels strangely peaceful compared to Homelander's. When Butcher looks at Huey, he sees Lenny. The one person he always believed he failed. And dying at the hands of someone who still represented kindness and humanity, almost felt like redemption to him. That's why the finale leaves such mixed emotions behind. Some moments were genuinely powerful. Some storylines absolutely needed more time. Some writing decisions felt weak. And some endings remained frustratingly vague. But at the very least, the show tried to end on deeper emotional ideas instead of just giant explosions and fan service. And now the universe is still wide open moving forward. Soldier Boy is still alive. Stan Edgar controls Vought again. Marie is positioned as the next symbol of heroism. So the question now becomes, is this truly the end of the Boys universe? Or is this only the beginning of whatever comes next?